All right, 1, 2, 3. Welcome everybody to the Life Point Table Talk podcast. My name is Jason. I am here with brother Pastor Tyler.
Hi there.
And we are continuing today with our Bible reading reflection. This has been so good. We are really enjoying it. And hope you've been following along with the reading or just tuning in, listening to our deep thoughts on the reading. And I hope you're enjoying it. Keep tuning in and subscribe and share. And this is now week 10 we are getting into here.
Wow.
And we're cruising along. We are at Numbers 34. We're going to go Numbers 34 through Deuteronomy 16, the Old Testament reading, and Mark 10:32 to Mark 13:37. So let's start off here in Numbers. We're going to wrap up Numbers, and then we're going to go into Deuteronomy, and you might not see any difference because these books are all kind of running together.
Yeah, it's one story.
Yep. And so we're at Numbers 34. Let's jump in here, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay, so we're about to enter Canaan land, the land of their inheritance. Eleazar and Joshua appointed to divide the land by tribes.
Yep, setting up their boundaries.
Yep. And so we're getting into who gets what kind of deal, which would I would guess cause all kinds of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking of my own children,
You're right.
dividing stuff.
He got more.
Yeah, I'm sure there was a lot of that.
Why did Phoenix get more?
Did we go to 35? We're gonna go a little briskly through this, hopefully, because quite a bit of it is kind of a review. Would you call it a review? Or
Yeah, well, Deuteronomy is it's like actually Moses preaching kind of this remembrance of the covenant and the promises and the history and what's happened through these, more or less these first 4 books.
Yeah.
So also encourage you to, if you haven't been listening to the older podcasts, weeks 1 through 9, dial those up, and a lot of this stuff is in there in much greater detail. Exodus, Numbers, all that good stuff for surezies.
So 35, one interesting thing is the Levites, which God has chosen among his chosen, they don't get like a regular inheritance land. It's a little different. And the Levites' cities, I guess you call them, the 6 cities, they're these cities of refuge.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting.
It is.
It says refuge for the stranger and the foreigner, and specifically for when someone kills somebody.
Yeah, as
on
long as
accident.
it's not manslaughter.
Yeah.
Yep.
You have to go to that city.
Yeah. And then they call upon, I just kept thinking of like a comic book. They call on the nearest male relative to be their blood avenger.
Yeah, blood avenger. That's the word.
Yeah,
the
word blood
I kept
avenger.
looking through different translations, and they all kept saying that.
Yeah, like
blood avenger.
No, it's the blood avenger.
Yeah, and it's intense, and that's for when somebody does kill them, right? Intentionally.
Yeah, that's if they put them on trial.
Yeah,
and if they're found guilty, then it's death. But if they're found innocent, it wasn't premeditated, it wasn't intentional, then they are free to live, but in those refuge cities. They still can't go back.
Yeah, oh, right.
Which is amazing, because one of the ways they can leave the refuge city
when the priest
is
dies?
if the high priest dies.
Yeah.
Which just made me really think of Shadows of Jesus, where, through his self-sacrificial death on the cross, like all that's been resolved and redeemed and rescued, and you can come on back.
Yeah.
Repent and come on back.
It is pretty interesting too that if they leave before that, the blood avenger can kill them.
Yeah, fair game.
Yeah. if they're caught outside of that city.
Yeah, it makes you think of like these Netflix shows like Last Kingdom or something, where you're just like guy waiting in the woods for you.
The blood of
slip up, sneak back in the village.
They get into some. Let's see. That's the end right there. We get into 36.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of just ends with them.
Yeah, it's a bit of a cliffhanger.
It's it's talking about marriage. They have to marry within their father's tribe because it gets all tricky and confusing
because
with
of
this inheritance.
The land inheritance, yeah.
Who gets it, all that kind of stuff.
Or else it would not be split up evenly.
So they're having to work through all that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
which is just relational community stuff. It's kind of practical, really.
A lot of it does seem very just, it is literally practical. Mm-hmm. Like, how are you setting up?
You have to have this governance is necessary.
Yeah, exactly. So we jump over to Deuteronomy.
Yes.
We're now in Deuteronomy. And we start off with the recounting the story of Exodus.
Mm-hmm. It's called the heartbeat of the Old Testament, I read, Deuteronomy. Referred to. It means, the word Deuteronomy means second law, which is confusing. It's really just means, when they say second, it's more like it's a reprising, recounting the law. Mm-hmm. It's not like a different one. It's the same thing recounted. The Hebrew title is These Are the Words, which once again, much better title.
Yeah. And so this is Moses going over again what they've been through because they're about there or they're there.
Well, we're still all the way almost through Deuteronomy before they really get in there. But
they really get
But
there.
Real time, like, they're right on the cusp. Okay. They're right about to go over. And I love this. Christopher Wright in his commentary says that the clearest feature of Deuteronomy, as we're about to go through these first 16, you can see this. He says the clearest feature of Deuteronomy is its call for total loyalty to Yahweh as the one true God. So you see this over and over throughout Deuteronomy, is just this driving home that Yahweh is the one true God amongst all these players, in the ancient Near East. They can't compare. They are monotheistic to the core. God, Yahweh only.
Yeah. So we start off, Exodus is recounted. So Moses is giving kind of a summary of like Tyler said, the what was in more detail in the earlier books. One thing I do love about this first one here is in Moses, in his way of retelling, this is the best. He says he's not allowed to go into the promised land because of them. God was angry with them, with the people. So it's on their account that he can't go in. Mm-hmm. And he says this several times throughout this.
We'll hit that again in 3 big time.
And then we get into 2.
Real quick in 1 though, I love it because this is the first time you ever, in verse 2, it's the first time it tells you that this should have been 11 days. 11 days or 40 years.
Wow.
11 days, yeah. All right, let me go to 2.
2, the wilderness days are recounted. Mm-hmm. It's more review. Interesting. It's talking about Esau's land in there as well, and Lot's land, which is interesting. Because these are characters we've already read about. Yeah. They've already got their land set up.
Yeah. And it's still theirs according to God's promises, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Even in their bonkersness.
3, we get into recounting the conquest.
Mm-hmm. And this is where you really see, again, Moses. It's like he pleads to see the promised land, but he also accepts his fate. And then once again he says, because of you people.
Yeah.
It's the you people stuff.
Yeah, it actually gets into that. He's pleading with God to go in.
Yeah.
And God says, enough.
Yeah.
Don't speak to me about this again. Which is amazing. I mean, the relationship they had is pretty incredible,
Mm.
especially considering how intense these times were as far as judgment, and holiness, and righteousness, and all that.
Yeah.
Um,
And it made me see Numbers 20 in a whole different light too, because that's the story where Moses is, punished, for about lack of a better word, and where he's not allowed to go into the promised land when he strikes the rock in a
Mhm.
way that's not honoring God, or it's very kind of mysterious. But I got to thinking about that when he says that he can't go in, and he says, because of you people. I heard it like in a different tone,
Mhm.
almost like a snarky, like, because of you people. And then I looked back at Numbers 20, verse 10, and it says, Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly before the rock, and he said to them, listen now, you rebels.
Yeah,
Shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? And I heard it in a different tone, like, instead of like in this God honoring way that he was told to do it, he was so frustrated with these stiff-necked people and just driving him crazy
Yeah.
that he was like, fine, you rebels.
Yeah.
Smack, smack.
he somehow crossed the line because they were
Yeah.
aggravating him
He-
so much.
They pushed him over the edge, and he
Yeah.
did something that just was not honoring how God called him to do it.
Yeah.
And I saw that in a new light with 3, because he's like, it's because of you people, I can't go in here.
Right.
Come on, really?
And it also in 3 it recounts again King Og again,
That's a big rabbit hole.
and which is super cool.
Mm-hmm.
He's the remnant of the Rephaim. I'm not sure I'm saying that.
Probably something like that.
Race of giants. And they describe his giant bed,
Yes.
just like a
Yeah, I know.
footnote there. Oh, by the way, he had this super giant bed.
Yeah, I was like, what's your sleep number?
Yes.
5,000.
Giant iron bed. It does talk about utterly destroying these people. No survivors left. Explicitly says destroyed men, women, and children in there. It does say that.
Is that in 3?
Yes. Yep. And it's talking about that kingdom, the Og's kingdom. And there, it also saying, what God is there in heaven or on earth that can do what you can do? And it's talking about how also everyone was afraid of them around these other cities. They were hearing of this group coming, which is interesting.
Yeah. And I think it's helpful. There's no easy way through these difficult passages when it's, the overarching killing and destroying of peoples and stuff like that. But it really helps me, at least, to see that even though there are evil men and women and leaders, but there's also always evil behind them and cosmic forces.
Yeah.
Enemies in the heavenly places and all that kind of stuff, that it's like a cosmic battle
Yeah.
that God's involved in, and these people that are in the land they're going into, they are tethered to not Yahweh.
Yeah.
Like, it's an evil, twisted, fallen, it's the whole package.
Yeah, and I don't totally understand it. There's different ways. I think sometimes in my brain I try to filter passages like that where there's no survivors, everybody's getting killed or whatever, whether that was a product of the people of that time and that's the way they lived, and that was kind of bled into the way they were treating other peoples. It was a kill or be killed kind of thing, maybe. Or like you're saying, there was also spiritual matters at hand.
Well, and we'll see later too. It's a holiness factor, which we got the whole book of Leviticus. It's also, if they don't destroy their quote unquote way of life, this evilness, then the second they go in there, they're just going to be tempted to be a part of that, and instead of being a part of what Yahweh's called them to be.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
It actually talks about that the reason why.
You're right.
At least that's what it says in these passages come. So let's keep moving. He's talking about, he's encouraging them to follow the law. We go over this, and this is kind of a theme here about teach your children and your children's children what you have seen. And it's kind of cool because he's talking to literal eyewitnesses still there, and the importance of this being passed on um, to your children, which really, I've got kids. This kind of passing on of what you've known and seen, the importance of it is just, over and over repeated. Remember this. And it starts talking about recounting about how they gathered and stood at the foot of the mountain while the mountain burned with fire, wrapped in darkness and cloud and gloom. Wow. And God spoke from out of the fire. And it kind of the way he is summarizing this stuff kind of helped me see it again a little clearer.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were afraid to go all the way up, but Moses did go up. Yeah. And so, but they could still hear. They weren't all the way up there, but they could hear the voice, and like literally, it wasn't just.
Yeah, I read.
They could literally hear a voice.
I read this about this, and it said Sinai was a cosmic audio-visual experience, but it was the audio that mattered.
Yeah,
because they heard.
Yeah. Let's see here.
It starts running down the commandments, right?
Yep.
Getting to there and idols and
another thing is that it's this theme of keep the commandments, and it almost, I don't know if it always says this, but it says it a lot, that it may go well with you and your children.
Yeah.
And prolong your days.
That you may live.
Yeah, it's literally reinforcing the idea that these commandments are for them.
Yeah.
It's for their own good.
It's like, if you could look at it from, like you said, you have kids, from the vantage point of a loving father.
Yeah.
That's really what it is.
Yeah, totally. Don't stick your finger in the light socket.
I'm telling you, that the burner is hot on that oven.
Yeah. All right. So 5 again. Actually, this is where he really recounts that God speaking to them face to face. He says God stood between them, or Moses stood between them and God. He goes through the 10 Commandments, again recounting this situation where God spoke to all of them and they heard it. Again, talking about walk in the way of the Lord that you may live, that it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land you possess.
Yeah, live long and prosper.
It's totally live long and prosper.
It really is. That's amazing.
It's pretty simple. I mean, the way he's laying it out. Eventually, he says it's blessing or a curse. It's up to you what you want.
But it really is. We overcomplicate everything. Later on, we're going to see too, where he talks about if you're obedient, there will be no poor in the land, 0. But the implication is, because like a verse or two later, he tells you how to deal with the poor.
Yeah, because you're
not going to do it.
Yeah.
But if you would just do it, it's pretty simple. Live long and prosper.
And then 6, this is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably, I'd say to the Jewish faith, the most important portion of Scripture, which is the Shema.
Yeah, sacred.
And 6, again, he starts off talking about, if you'll hear and do the law, it may go well with you, and you'll multiply in the land of milk and honey. Again, he keeps telling them this. It's like you're talking about with your children. It's very trying to ingrain this into their heads. And the Shema means hear, and it is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And that is the greatest commandment that we really have. And
and if Jesus quotes it, then you need to pay attention.
Yeah.
Which actually, when in our New Testament reading this week, we see it in Mark.
Yep. When they were asking him about what the greatest commandment is. So, all I like some of the words. He's talking about the words be on your heart.
Hmm.
Teach your children diligently. Talk to them when you sit in the house, when you're walking on your way, when you lie down, and when you rise. Um, man, I just just for me as a talking about being a parent and the busy life that we have with all the um, running around and stuff, this really was sticking out to me. The importance of he's telling them to teach their children.
Mm-hmm.
That's the parent's job. Like,
Yeah.
this is important, and pretty much all the time is
Yeah.
what he's saying. When
This is
you're
a
in your house,
remembrance.
when you're leaving, when you're going to bed, when
Yeah.
you wake up, this is important. It's like a lifestyle.
I wrote down some of
thing.
the phrases: impress them, talk about them, tie them, bind them, write them, your hands, your foreheads, your houses, your gates.
Yeah.
This is your whole life.
Yeah.
And he says it literally in verse 20, when your son asks you in the time to come,
Yeah.
what do the testimonies and the statutes and the judges mean, which the Lord our God commanded you? This is the answer.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, it's so true. I mean, the importance of the family relationship
Mm-hmm.
and where things are really honed in on and as he says, be on our hearts. And he specifically talks about that bind on your hand, between your eyes, right on your doorpost and gate. Obviously, some of those things have been taken literally,
Mm-hmm.
and they, with phylacteries and literal
Little box in
little
your little
boxes
forehead box with the
bound to
tiny
your
scrolls inside.
hand and your forehead and Jewish faith, and put them on your doors. I forget what. Do you remember what the name is for that? My parents have those on their doors. Pretty cool. Again, he's saying God will give you good cities, food, vineyards, water, trees that you did not build, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he's saying so you'll be able to explain to your children what this history is.
Yeah.
7, we get into destroying the nations before you.
Yeah, this is what we were talking about getting around
Show
to.
no mercy, make
Mhm.
no covenant. Do not marry with them, because they will lead you away from God. Another view of this is there was such a specific time and place right here where God was doing a work
Yeah.
that the stakes were really high.
Mm-hmm.
There was not a lot of room for error, which is why some of this was so intense. Break down their altars and their pillars. Again, they're always connected to some other deities. And I love this. God keeps his covenant, and to those who love them to 1,000 generations. You will be blessed
Yeah.
above all other peoples, will take away all sickness.
Yeah, even in the midst of all this destruction, he's still going back to that covenant promise talk.
Yeah.
And I love this too. It says, let's see, Christopher Wright once again. He said that the promise that all the nations, through this covenant, the promise that all the nations of the earth would ultimately be blessed did not mean that particular nations in history would not be judged. Like,
Right.
just because this blessing is yours for the taking doesn't mean that you can just behave any way you want.
Right.
There is an obedience to grace.
Yeah. We've
There is a
seen this
proper
over and over
response.
again with them.
And Israel wasn't exempt. It
Yeah.
started with them. And
Yeah.
later on, he's going to use Assyria and Babylon to judge them.
Yeah.
Just like they were doing right now in this conquest.
Yep. One side note in 7 there, it again talks about God will send hornets among the enemies.
I love the hornets.
It's kind of a side note almost. I don't want to say side note, but it's not
Just-
talked about a ton, but this idea of God sending hornets in,
Yeah.
that'll take the people out. You could go down a interesting rabbit trail with that.
Yeah, with our brother Greg Boyd's book
Yeah.
does that, yeah.
Yeah.
Where they would have let
he-
God do it his way.
God,
It
he
may have
thinks
looked
God
differently.
way would be just hornets. They wouldn't have had to do anything. I don't know, maybe. 8, We get into, again, he's reinforcing being careful to follow the commandments. You will live, multiply, and possess the land. This is the theme going on here.
Yes, and I think he's recalling them to remember God in the hard times of the past, but don't forget him in the good times to come in the future.
And this is part where he's talking about he gave them manna
Mm.
to let them know man does not live on bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of God.
So good.
Which sounds familiar because the Lord quoted that.
Jesus said it straight to Satan's face.
Yep. Another interesting thing says their clothing did not wear out for 40 years.
Yeah. Like I want to shop where they shop.
And
it's
it
obviously not Forever 21.
Yeah.
The shirts last a week.
You get a week. And it specifically talks about what we were talking about, God's relationship in this with these people is like a man who disciplines his son.
Yeah.
So God disciplines us.
Which is what a good father does. A good father doesn't let his son climb in the oven.
Yeah.
You know, no way.
And again, they're talking about blessing here, and it's kind of over the top blessing. I mean, they will lack nothing. They will eat and be full.
Verse 18 says, "He who is giving you power to make wealth."
Yeah, and in the it's interesting because it consistently talks about that, and then immediately gives a warning. Don't forget in your prosperity where you came from, and who has done this for you.
Yeah, it's from God.
So the blessing is there, and also don't forget. And don't go to other idols, or you will die.
That makes me think of the rich young ruler with Jesus. Said he loved him. He was obeying all the commandments. He said, one thing you lack, sell all your stuff. And he was like, what a bummer. I got lots of stuff.
Yeah. Let's see, 9. He's talking about going in today and cross the Jordan. God will destroy the Anakim, again, sons of Anak, which is interesting. These are the giant people. And here's where it talks about God not driving them out. This is a 9, not driving them out because of Israel's righteousness, but because these nations were of their wickedness.
Honestly, I think this is one of the most important passages in all the Old Testament.
I mean,
to help understand this.
Yeah, there's so many, like I was saying, there's different ways that I try to process some of the killing and the no mercy and kind of things. And you have to reckon with what it's saying here. I mean, it's, if we're going to...
Pretty explicit.
If we're going to reckon with any of it, it also says this. It's because of their wickedness this was happening.
It's God's the righteous one, not Israel.
And I can't help but think some of these folks were in the wrong place at the wrong time. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They were caught in the middle of some craziness, And in this, he's talking about from the day you came out of Egypt, you've been rebellious toward God. He reminds them how they went astray so quickly, recalling how he was on the mountain while he was getting the commandments, and they went to the golden calf. And he talks about I can't remember the language, but he says he laid prostrate before the Lord for 40 days and nights to intercede. I can't remember if it said that. I know it said he was there for 40 days, but did it say he laid prostrate for that long?
No, that's added. And what's new here in Deuteronomy 9 also is there was never, ever before this any talk about his intercession for Aaron.
Yeah.
It's brand new.
Yeah, God was going to take him out.
Yeah, which makes sense if you read, Exodus.
Yeah, totally. Because he's recounting this golden calf story.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought about that.
And Aaron was at the
I remember bringing that up. Why did he get mercy?
Yeah, the guy that made the cow,
Yeah.
who was left in charge. And
Yep, it was Moses interceding, which is a fascinating concept.
Yeah, which I love too, because it just really drives home the power of prayer.
Yeah.
People say, why pray? Well, there's lots of examples
Yeah.
in these first 5 books of the Bible of why you pray.
Yeah. And he, in this same passage here, he's retelling God told them to take possession of the land and they wouldn't do it.
My favorite line of this chapter is, "You have been rebellious against the Lord from the day I knew you."
Yeah. And then again, he says he lays
people.
prostrate before the Lord for 40 days and nights and intercedes for Israel. So if you wondered what he was doing up there for that time, this seems to be a big part of it. 10, he's retelling the story of how he got the tablets, the 10 Commandments. These are the new tablets, I believe. Excuse me. And he made the ark and put them in the ark. Interesting line here. He's talking about, what does God require of you?
Yeah, love that. I have that here too. Verse 12.
It says, fear him, walk in his ways, love him, serve him with all your heart, with all your soul. Keep all his commandments, which are good for you. That was my summary of that part.
And it sounds like some of the later prophets too. Like Micah said, act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God.
Yeah.
It's just as beautiful.
Yeah.
Once again, I mean, you don't want to like undercook it or whatever, but it's pretty simple. Like, it's not that it's easy, you know.
Yeah.
It's going to be difficult. It's the Christian walk is not easy, but it is simple.
Yeah. On another note there, he does use the phrase God of gods there and Lord of lords. It's just an interesting side note, using the term gods, little g.
My book I'm reading said that Yahweh's sovereignty is not just covenantal, but cosmic. He is the God.
11, Moses talks directly to those who saw the things God did with their own eyes. Again, he's specifically telling them, again, recounting how they came out of Egypt. It's the same thing, just over and over.
Yeah, don't forget.
Also recounting how the earth opened up and killed those that rebelled. Interesting, he talks about how the land they're going into doesn't have to be irrigated like the land in Egypt. If you do as the Lord asks, he will give you rain and grain and wine and oil, and you will eat and be full. This same prosperous language.
Yep.
And again, if you don't listen, you will get no rain, the land will yield nothing, and you will perish quickly.
Yeah, it's always blessings or curses.
Yeah. Bind these things to your heart.
Which is how it ends too, which is so awesome with the 2 mountains.
Yeah.
I'm not going to try to pronounce them, but
Yeah, there's a blessing on one.
a curse on the other.
Gerizim. And a curse on Mount Ebal. I'm probably saying those wrong. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's where he says, I'm setting before you a blessing and a curse. Basically, you're blessed if you do, and you're cursed if you don't.
And Deuteronomy, in a couple of weeks from now, is going to end with the call to choose life or choose death.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah, it makes it even more clear.
Yeah, it really drives it home.
12, we get into destroying anything to do with other gods. He starts talking about designated places of worship in the land that they're about to take.
Yeah.
And it gets into details again about sacrifices and tithe. It gets into things they can eat and not eat.
And I think it really is tied to the sacrifice. Like it's a little more lenient than it was in the previous books we've read.
Yeah.
Like you can actually eat meat and kill stuff, but just it can't be for sacrifice.
Yeah.
That's got to be in the holy place, the designated place.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you risk what is happening in the land you're about to enter with the way they sacrifice to their gods and
right. Yeah, and he talks about be careful not to. Where am I? Where are we here? He's talking about when God drives out these nations, be careful not to fall into being ensnared with them.
Mm-hmm.
Don't even ask how they worship their gods.
Wow.
Don't even talk. And again, this is this wickedness thing, because they have done every abominable thing that the Lord hates.
Yes.
They have done for their gods.
And it says, for they even burn their sons and daughters in fire to their gods.
Yeah. Wow.
I forget the Hebrew word, but it's with the word that it's translated holy war, which I know has a lot of baggage.
Sure.
That phrase, but it's what's kind of being alluded to here. Like, this is pure, unadulterated evil that you're walking into.
Yeah.
You can't be any part of this.
13, let's go through these a little faster. Talks about prophets and dreamers. If they tell you to go for other gods, you got to kill them.
Mm-hmm. Which is exactly what Jesus was accused of.
Yeah.
Falling in this category.
And it gives 3 things here. Prophets and dreamers. Family entices you. Again.
Kill them.
Kill them. And if a city entices you, a whole city, destroy them and everything in the city. Never rebuild it.
Taking this holiness business pretty seriously.
Yeah. 14, it talks about don't cut yourselves or shave your head. I feel like this had to do with the religions.
Yeah.
These other religions.
I think what it looked like.
It talks about animals that can eat again. It has to do with divided hoofs. Chewing the cud.
Mm-hmm. Once again, it's a big recap of their previous Levitical laws.
Yeah. Again, it talking about these designated places of worship. 15, we get into the
recounting the Sabbath.
The Sabbath year,
yeah.
Sabbatical year. That's
amazing.
where he's talking about there will be no poor among you because the Lord will certainly bless you. You will lend to nations, but you will not borrow. And it specifically then talks about generously give to those in need.
Yeah.
Like you're talking about.
No, because he said it's in the ideal obedience to God's commands, there would be no poor. Yeah. But it's not going to be the ideal. So it's ideal versus realistic.
Yeah.
And I love in verse 14, it says, you shall give to him as the Lord your God has blessed you.
Yeah.
That verse really stood out to me.
Yeah. Don't give with resentfulness.
Yeah, and Paul was such a devout Jew. You have to know that this is probably resonating in his heart and mind when he said in Corinthians that to be a cheerful giver.
Yeah,
it's got to be that same that same mindset.
He's really hammering it home.
Yeah,
the whole thing is almost about that. And also it says in there, the poor will never cease to be in the land.
Yeah,
which again,
another Jesus
quoted.
Yep. You can tell he lived in Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
Saturated in it.
16, we get into, we'll end here on the feasts. He's going over Passover.
Yes, this is the holy rhythm of Israel's life.
The Feast of Weeks. The Feast of Booths. Which is at the tents.
Yeah, but you talked about that last week in our Mark one where the Transfiguration, that was part of Peter's whole deal with, Lord, it's good to be here. Should we build some booths? Should we build some houses?
And it ends there with the Lord appointing judges and officers, pursue justice.
Yeah.
They're commanded there. So that is our Old Testament reading for this week. That ends at Deuteronomy 16. That's where we were, 16. Yeah. A lot of recount, but I would suggest don't skip it, because there's details in there about these previous books that are being illuminated.
Yeah, exactly.
Even in this retelling.
It's a good word.
And kind of...
It's like a sermon,
Kind of, you can see even the highlights for for Moses, and this intensity of creating a culture and a people, of ingraining it in your way of life and in your children, that is really powerful. And I love that.
Yeah, awesome.
So, okay, we will end there for our Old Testament reading, and we will come back with our New Testament. We're going to be in Mark. We've got 3 chapters there, I believe. So check back in to part 2 of our Bible reading reflection. We'll get into our New Testament reading.
Awesome.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
Okay, everybody, welcome to the Live Point Table Talk podcast. This is part 2 of week 10. We just did part 1, our Old Testament reading. I am Jason, here with Pastor Tyler.
I am Tyler. Hello.
And we are going to do our New Testament reading now. And we are at Mark 10:32 on the dot to Mark 13:37. That's what we're going to be talking about here. So let's get into it. So let's start off here, Mark 10:32. It starts off Jesus again explicitly detailing how he will be betrayed, beat, mocked, whipped, killed, and rise again. I'm not sure how many times he's done this at this point, but
Yeah.
it's pretty amazing how detailed, especially this one is. It's pretty specific to everything that happens to him coming up.
Right.
We get into James and John asking to sit at his right hand.
Mm-hmm. We talked about this a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
If you want to listen back to that in Matthew, it's a little more detailed. And Matthew has a mom. Mom's missing in Mark.
Ah.
Yeah, that's the
Mom
difference.
was in there.
And Matthew, it was mom saying, "Hey, got these 2 boys here.
Okay.
I want you to hook them up."
And Mark is saying it was them. huh?
Mm-hmm. Well, and Mark, that's kind of Mark's MO throughout his gospel is he doesn't paint the disciples in a very glorious light often. And I think it's on his theme of discipleship. He wants us to learn from them and to be discipled and to grow, and
Interesting.
it's almost like don't do this
Yeah.
kind of feeling, But it's still an amazing passage.
It is. Jesus responds asking, can they drink the cup? Can they be baptized like him? And the answer is actually yes, which is amazing, which had to do with their future, martyrdom?
Persecution and martyrdom,
persecution.
yeah, both of them.
And at the end there, he says it's not up to him. Again, we got into that. Let's see.
Yeah, and I love it too because what they're wanting is they're wanting to sit at his right and left hand. They're wanting to be exalted.
Yeah.
So it's this very big theme also in Mark where the first will be last and the last will be first.
Yeah, that's the what not to do.
Yeah, and I love it too because he says he basically says this is how the world does it. They lord it over people, they exercise authority, but my kingdom's a different way.
Yeah.
It looks differently, and this is one of the coolest verses in all the New Testament. And he says, and this is exactly what it looks like. In verse 45, it says, "For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." Like, that's actually what this kind of exaltation looks like.
Yeah.
In God's kingdom and God's economy.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Upside down.
And I geek out on the word ransom.
Oh, it's so good.
I
It's
wanna
huge.
understand the details of that totally.
No, it's a redemption talk and rescue and ransom
When we get into the blind man loudly bothering Jesus, and Jesus asks, "What do you want from me?"
Oh, I love that. He's like pulling on his faith.
Yeah,
He knows. He knows what he wants.
and he says it. Your faith has made you whole.
Yeah.
Which is a something he says often in these healing situations. Um,
Awesome.
let's see. Then we get into 11. This is the triumphal entry.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus enters on the donkey. People are spreading their coats on the ground, singing Hosanna, bless coming kingdom of our father David. That sticks out because
Yeah.
it kind of gives you an idea of what they were thinking this king was going to be like, the conquering David. And this, correct me if I'm wrong, the order here in Mark is a little different on some of these sequences.
It is, especially with the fig tree.
Yeah. It says then he goes in and just looks around.
Yeah, and in Matthew, the fig tree is a lot easier to understand because he's just been talking about, through parables, about Israel kind of missing it,
Mm-hmm.
and which is going to come later here in Mark, and not seeing, Jesus for who he was, and so their fruit isn't showing,
Yeah.
and so they're going to have to be cut off at least for a time.
So he curses the fig tree, and then it just moves on.
Yeah, then it is. Yeah,
Then it goes to the temple where he drives out the people selling and buying. That famous passage.
yeah, which is, and this is one of those passages too that I wish we could just have a actual look into that time, because especially in the Passover season, it was bonkers. I mean, there was just, I don't know, maybe even 100,000 up to that.
Wow. Yeah.
Visitors coming with their sacrifice, but this is taking place in the Gentile court. So it had a feel of like an Oriental bazaar, like that sort of thing. And so instead of being a place of prayer and this place of solemn holiness, it's like a circus almost.
Like, what are the things we have?
Like
the fair?
the carnival.
The fair.
Yeah, it's almost like that sort of vibe.
Sell your wares kind of thing?
Yeah, and it was never its original intent.
Yeah, that's a famous house of prayer.
Yeah, it's never, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a robber's den.
Then it jumps to the fig tree,
Mm-hmm.
and it's dead the next morning. Or I think it says that the next morning, which is different from Matthew, which I think was immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the language there where he's talking about those who believe can throw a mountain into the sea.
Yeah.
Awesome poetic language there.
That's faith talk right there.
Yeah.
Love it.
And it's interesting too, right? The very next line, he's talking about forgiveness when you pray. If you have anything against anyone, to settle that. Right in the middle,
Must be pretty important.
Yeah, this super human faith. He talks about the importance of forgiveness. The very next line.
Yeah, you know what? Real quick to backtrack, one big difference from Mark and Matthew too with the temple and him turning over the tables is this is fascinating to me. In Mark thing, it says the triumphant entry, and they say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest." And it says in verse 11, Jesus entered Jerusalem and came into the temple, and after looking around at everything, he left for Bethany with the 12.
Mm-hmm.
And in Matthew, it's just straight in. They march in straight to the temple.
Yeah.
He sees what's going on. And in Mark, it's almost like a, what do you call that? Reconnaissance.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
checking it out.
like checking it out. Like, wait, what's going on here? And like went back to Bethany, which he often did, went off to a more private place. And then it says on the next day. Then it's the fig tree, and then coming back into the temple. So that was pretty fascinating.
I think those are things that maybe bother some people, or maybe bothered me when I was younger. These differences, they don't bother me anymore so much.
No,
it just seems like total two different people telling a story.
Yeah, and they both have very different kind of audiences and different things they're driving at the way they told their story. So it's pretty cool. And
11 ends there with the Pharisees trying to trick him. about his authority, whose authority he has, and he turns the tables on him and says, "How did John have authority?" And they can't answer him, so he says, "So I won't answer you."
I love it. And I love it too.
Hilarious.
He specifically, I think this is very specifically brings up John because of the very first thing in chapter 12 with the parable with the vineyard and the way they treated
Parable
the
of the tenants,
prophets.
yeah.
He's saying it's John's part of that whole deal.
Yeah.
Like he was kind of the last of that.
Yeah, and I don't want to do too much on it. We've done that, but it's the an owner has a vineyard, and he's what? How do you say it? How do you describe that story there? The parable.
Yeah, well, it's the parable of the vine growers is what my translation says. He planted the vineyard, built a tower. He sent a slave to the vine growers. They took him and beat him, sent him away. Again, he sent them another slave, and they wounded him in the head, treated him shamefully. And he sent another, and just on and on and on. And then finally he says, I have one more to send, my son who I love.
Right.
Which is so cool because in Mark, that exact phrase in the Greek he's used twice now, and that's at his baptism. This is my son that I love. And also on the Mount of Transfiguration, exact same phrase, the son that I love.
Yeah.
And they'll kill him.
Yeah.
So what he's saying is, through the ages, I've sent you prophet after prophet after prophet. You've done whatever you wanted with them. You've beaten them. You've killed them. You haven't listened to them. So you're not going to listen to my actual very son.
Yeah. And I think I don't know, I was reading this again, and I was kind of jumped out of me, the translation I'm saying, it says he leased this land.
Yeah, it's always his. That you're thinking?
Yeah, but in a kind of sovereignty situation where it's his, but he's given authority to these other people.
Mm-hmm.
They have a certain power and say in what they're doing.
Right.
He's in charge of it, but they are obviously making decisions he doesn't like.
And I think
you know
it's
what I mean?
important what you said there, and we talked about this before we started, is he's specifically talking about these leaders too.
Mm-hmm.
Your average Jew 2,000 years ago wasn't a Pharisee or a Sadducee or a scribe. They were just a farmer, stonemason, just trying to live and survive and be a good, devout Jew. And he's coming against these leaders and how they have led them astray.
They had a responsibility.
And it's been taken away, and they haven't listened to the prophets that have been sent before, ending with John, which he just talked about.
Wow.
With John the Baptist, who Jesus calls the greatest of them, and now it leads up to Jesus himself, and they're not going to listen to him either.
Yeah. And that goes right into, they then try to trick him on taxes.
Again?
Yep. And that's awesome.
Yeah.
He makes them give him a coin and says whose face is on it. It's a classic render unto Caesar what is Caesar's.
Yep.
And these are so... I hate that I'm almost over familiar with it. It's like, oh yeah, but it's saying right there how amazed they all were. These things,
Yeah.
he's catching them off guard. It wasn't at all what they were expecting to hear. Then they're asking him about the resurrection. It's this whole deal about who's going to be whose wife or husband in the next life. And I thought this was cool.
Yeah.
He says, but it was this, I forget how it said it, but he says you don't know the answer basically because you don't know Scripture.
Oh my gosh, it's
like
the best.
Right away.
Well, here's what jumped out at me.
He says you're wrong, isn't it? Not because you don't know the Scripture or something like that.
Yeah. Well, and this is gonna sound like overly simplistic, but like you said, we get a little familiar with these passages.
Mm-hmm.
This time around, I just got so excited that Jesus believes in the resurrection. Like that's pretty great news right there. Like it's legit. Yeah. Jesus is defending the resurrection, so it must be real. It must be true. It must be something that we can look forward to and expect. that he is the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Like,
Yeah.
it just really jumped out at me this time. Like,
Yeah.
oh, no, he's really driving it home. This is for real. Because the Sadducees didn't believe in the supernatural.
Right.
And that's what he said. He says, this is not the reason you are mistaken, that you do not understand the scriptures or the power of God. Which that really jumped out at me as well.
Yeah, I love that the phrase he uses, the God of the living.
Yeah.
And then he says the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, meaning they're alive right now.
We can't process that entirely, where they're at, but they're with him.
Yeah, that's awesome passage there.
Yeah, and the marriage thing, that's we don't have the time to really, break that wide open because it's pretty loaded too. But one thing I took away too is because it can be a little challenging too because it feels like you're not going to be. There's no marriage in heaven. There's because the whole thing they're asking whose wife is she going to be? She's gone through like 7 different brothers, and he says just like the angels in heaven, you don't marry. But there may not be marriage per se in heaven, but there still is love, and love personified in its most real form. This eternity with God. So I think that I don't know. I took that away from that they may not marry anymore in heaven, but it doesn't mean that love doesn't still exist.
Right.
With your loved ones, with everyone else.
Yeah.
And in its purest,
like you'll know them.
Yeah, it's like even better.
It never asks. I mean, that's a legit question.
Yeah, even though they're trying to trick you. Yeah,
like, what's going on?
And so many people were remarried, and without this specific scenario with the brothers.
All right, then we get into here. What's the most important commandments?
Yeah,
and we were just reading this on the other podcast. I believe it was Deuteronomy 6.
It sure was.
And it's the Shema. Hear, God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And also love your neighbor as yourself.
That's Leviticus 19.
And
he combines them.
Yeah. And this is the guy is answering that part, I think. Somebody's, who he's talking to, and he says it's better than burnt offerings. And he says you're not far from the kingdom. You're starting to get it.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. You're starting to get it.
Yeah. Then there's this part about him saying he's Lord.
Yeah, he challenges them.
This is the part where he quotes a psalm where David is saying, "The Lord said to my Lord."
Yeah, and I love it too. After he says, "You're not far from the kingdom of God," it says, after that, no one would venture to ask him any more questions.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about that. How
they marveled at his.
He had the scripture down. His knowledge of them was incredible. He gets into talking about beware the hypocrite scribes, their outward search for honor, outward honor, and it segues into the poor widow giving what she has out of her poverty, that she gave more because she was giving out of her poverty. It's amazing.
It is, and I love the contrast too, because it goes on about like they walk around in their long robes and their chief seats and everything, and it's like he's contrasting the scribes and
right
their fancy pants, literally their fancy pants, into this widow who just, it's that last shall be first theme continuing on.
Yeah, and it's also this like, I don't know, this. With what she had, she was able to do this amazing thing. It wasn't about necessarily all this amount. It was about the heart and what she had and what she was doing with what she had,
because it wasn't much.
Yeah. And then we get into 13 here. It's a big one. He predicts the temple being torn down. Is this the part where they're saying how pretty it is?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Behold, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
And
then his answer is, you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another which will not be torn down. It's like,
yeah, totally.
yeah.
And
And what's interesting too is he likens himself to the temple, his body.
yeah,
But this has really stood out to me. Verses 1 and 2 are public. It says, as he was going out of the temple, so it's a kind of a public setting, they say, what wonderful stones, what wonderful buildings. And he says, do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another, which will not be torn down. In other words, as an earshot. The crowds, people that are pursuing him, both for him and against him.
mm-hmm.
Well, it'll be twisted, but that will be used against him in his trial.
Right.
Not
That's
not
right.
long, which is they accuse him that he's going to destroy the
The
temple.
temple.
But then verse 3, it changes, it shifts, and it says he's sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple. Peter and James and John and Andrew were questioning him, and they were right there, the word privately.
Mm.
So it goes from public to private, and that really jumped out at me, like that little inner circle. They get the...
It's talked about that before, where
Yeah.
he explains things better to them. He'll give everybody else a kind of
Because
general
they have
parable.
ears to hear, eyes to see.
Mm.
It's going to land on that fertile soil for the most part.
And that's when we get into this whole sequence here. I guess it's
They want to know when this is all going to happen.
famous, or I don't know what you want to call it.
Yeah, Mark 13 is one of the most talked about chapters in the whole Bible.
So this is where we're talking about rumors of wars, nation against nation, earthquakes and famines. These are all birth pains for the end.
And we encourage you to dial up the older podcasts with Pastor Katrina, because she did an amazing job breaking this down and talking about how he's talking about different times, and he's actually kind of in a holding pattern of answering their initial question until some verses later.
Yeah.
And the initial question is about the temple.
Yeah.
When's that going to happen?
Yeah.
The destruction.
And you were talking earlier about kind of a synopsis or a way of looking at this differently instead of all the intricate details of what he's saying, like
yeah. Well, what jumped out at me is no matter what your view of Mark 13 and the different ways it's been interpreted, is you can get kind of caught up in the whole end time narrative and the anxiety and the worry and the trying to figure stuff out and getting bogged down in the detail and all the minutia.
Abomination of desolation.
Yeah, all the stuff.
When and where.
Yeah, and all the rabbit holes, which I admit, there's that time and that place. But this time around, what I came away with is that really at the heart of this is it's a warning against being deceived by false claims about the end being near, and by individuals who will try to pass themselves off as prophets or even something more.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what, that's good advice for today as well as back then.
Yeah.
To not get led astray. Don't get distracted by this stuff and take your eyes off the prize, which is Jesus.
Yeah.
And being tethered to him, because you're going to see in this passage over and over again words like don't be frightened, don't be scared, be on your guard, don't worry. Like he's encouraging them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a discouragement. He's saying, yes, these things are going to happen and they will happen. But don't be frightened.
Yeah.
Be on your guard. Be alert.
And I was just what we were talking about before, the parable of the tenants. It ends there with him talking about stay awake and alert because the master of the house will return.
Yeah.
This similar kind of analogy of this is his. You guys have a certain responsibility right now, and I'm going to be coming back. So be ready.
Yeah.
Um,
And that was their kind of prayer when they would gather the church. When it first got going, they would end their time together saying Maranatha, which means Lord come. It's Aramaic. Lord come.
yeah. It's amazing.
They were expecting that, and they've been expecting. We've all been in times expecting his return for 2,000 years.
And I think that's so good. The what you're saying, there's this comfort there to this idea of the Lord returning, setting things right. But there's also I don't want to say, there's a warning: be awake,
vigilance,
be ready.
No,
and so it's like both this comfort and this like be ready kind of,
And he's not sugarcoating it. He's saying that some of you are going to be persecuted, killed. I mean, there's some hard stuff being said here, but the whole point of it, at the core is to don't be afraid.
Yeah, and I
Don't
can't
worry.
help. I love this poetic language in here about the sun darkened, the moon gives no light, the stars fall from the sky, the powers in heaven shaken.
The Son of Man coming in clouds with great power.
Yeah, it's just. I loved all that verbiage and poetry there.
Oh, yeah, he will send forth the angels and gather his elect from the four winds.
Yeah,
That's just incredible.
and I don't want to mean poetry like I'm saying I don't think it's real or anything. I just literally the way he's using words here is really impactful. And at one point he literally says if the Lord doesn't cut the day short, there'd be no one left.
Yeah.
At one point. It's intense, but then like you said, the one part he's saying you'll be persecuted, but don't be anxious, because the Holy Spirit will speak through you.
Mm-hmm.
There's this comfort and a vigilance, like you said. That's really,
and he's saying, and there's mission and there's purpose. He's saying there's work to do.
Yeah.
He says this gospel message has to be preached to all the nations before the end can come.
Yeah.
So he's sustaining that right now by his grace.
Yeah.
And we're not to those quite yet, to those days that will be cut short.
Yeah.
Because there's work to do, and be about your Father's business.
Yeah.
With confidence and without anxiety.
Yeah, that's great.
No matter what comes.
I think that's a really great way to look at that. So we'll end there. That's about right where our reading ended with 37, and so we'll end with that, my friends. Stay awake and alert.
Yeah.
And be comforted.
Maranatha, Lord come.
The master of the house will return. All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and
yes, this is so much
listening.
fun.
And I was really blessed by this reading this week, and I hope you were as well.
Yeah, stick with us, keep at it, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Have a good week.